You know that feeling that the world is kind of spinning out of control? Well, you're not wrong. The old, predictable era of globalization, it's over. So, what comes next? Today, we're going to break down the work of international politics expert Professor Masayuki Tadokoro. He's come up with this incredible framework that does more than just explain the chaos. It actually gives us four possible futures to look out for. So, let's get right into it. So let's start with this quote because it just cuts right to the heart of the issue. For decades, it felt like we were all on this one-way street toward a single global system. But Professor Tadokoro is telling us, nope, that dream is officially over. The tide has turned, and we're not just slowing down, we're actually going backwards. Okay, so if we're going to figure out where we're headed, we first have to get a handle on exactly when and why the old world order started to crack. Because this wasn't some slow, gradual thing. It was a huge, dramatic break. What's so wild is how it all comes down to a single year, 2016. Before then, the whole idea was that borders were getting fuzzier and a single global market was pretty much a done deal. But then 2016 hits, and with Trump's election and Brexit, it's like someone slammed on the brakes. Hard. It was this massive pivot back to a world of walls, trade wars, and countries carving out their own territory. This slide really just lays it all out, doesn't it? We went from a world that was supposedly guided by rules and cooperation to one that's now all about raw power. But here's the real kicker that Professor Tadokoro points out. This whole system wasn't taken down by some outside enemy. It started to crumble from the inside when the very country that built it, the United States, started to back away because of its own messy internal politics. All right, so the old order is gone. The billion-dollar question now is what's going to replace it? And this is where Professor Tadokoro's work is just so helpful. He gives us a clear framework with four very different scenarios for what our future might actually look like.
Okay, this table right here, this is the key to understanding everything. Professor Tadokoro says our future basically boils down to two huge questions. First, look at the horizontal axis. Do we have a strong global leader, a hegemon, or is power just all over the place? And then, the vertical axis. Are democratic values winning out, or are they on the decline? Depending on how you answer those two questions, well, that gives you four completely different worlds we can end up in.
So, first up, scenario one. Let's call this one the comeback. This is the world where the U.S. gets its act together, rallies its allies, and that liberal, rules-based system we used to know gets put back on track. It's a nice thought, right? But Tadokoro thinks it's pretty unlikely. He points out that the political divisions inside the U.S. are so deep that a real sustained return to global leadership is, well, it's a long shot. Now for scenario two, and this is the one Professor Tadokoro thinks is the most realistic, a new Cold War. But this isn't your grandparents' Cold War. This is a world splitting into two very different teams, a democratic team led by the U.S. and an authoritarian team led by China. And the key word you're going to hear everywhere is decoupling, where technology, supply chains, even finance all get separated into two rival systems that don't talk to each other. Scenario three is where things just get chaotic. In this world, there's no clear leader at all. It's not two big blocks, it's a messy free-for-all. You've got multiple powers, the US, China, the EU, India, Russia, all jockeying for position. Tadokoro basically warns this is a recipe for a super unstable world, where international rules just get ignored. And finally, scenario four. This one imagines a world where the authoritarian model, the one pushed by China and Russia, really starts to catch on. In this future, democracy isn't the aspirational goal anymore. Instead, systems built on state control and digital surveillance become the new normal for more and more countries. It would be a profoundly different world order. So there you have it, four possible futures: a liberal revival, a new Cold War, total disorder, or a rising authoritarian order. So which one is it going to be? Well, this is where Tadokoro's most important insight comes in. He says it's not going to be just one of them. The reality is going to be way more complicated. And here's the biggest takeaway from his whole analysis. Our future isn't going to fit neatly into any one of those boxes. Tadokoro's prediction is that we're heading for a messy, overlapping hybrid. The main story will probably be the new Cold War between the US and China. But at the same time, we're also going to have the chaos of all those other powers competing and the creeping spread of authoritarian ideas. All of it, all at once. So, this messy hybrid future leads us to one last, really powerful idea from Professor Tadokoro. It's about who actually gets to call the shots. And it's not just about the US and China. It's the question on everyone's mind, right? Is the future just going to be decided in Washington and Beijing? Professor Tadokoro says not so fast. He gives us a much smarter way to think about this by splitting the whole idea of world order into two separate parts. First, there's what he calls the structure. You can think of this like the stage in a play. And yeah, the superpowers get to build the stage. The competition between the US and China absolutely defines the basic military, economic, and tech landscape that everyone else has to operate in. But then you have the direction. And honestly, this is the most brilliant part of his whole argument. The actual path the world takes on that stage, that's not decided just by the big guys. No way. It's determined by the collective choices of what we call middle powers, influential countries like the EU, Japan, India, and others. Think of them as the swing voters of the world order. Their decisions are what will ultimately tip the scales and decide which future we all get. And that leaves us with this final massive question. The huge rivalry between the US and China sets the stage, it creates the game board. But the game itself isn't decided yet. The ultimate direction of our world won't be settled in just Washington or Beijing. It's going to be determined by the choices and the alliances made by dozens of other countries. Their collective decision is what will determine which path we all go down. So the biggest question of all is, which direction will they choose?